Welcome to a new episode of Inside the Economist's Mind. This is part of our new series, Career Conversations, where we explore the paths, challenges, and opportunities in the world of economics careers. Today, we're diving deep into what's really a cornerstone of any successful economics career: analytical skills.
Absolutely critical.
We'll be looking at how these skills are evaluated, particularly in job interviews, and maybe more importantly, how you can actively develop them. Our mission really is to give you a clearer picture of what analytical thinking means in economics and, offer some practical insights on cultivating that ability.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, I think it's important to stress that analytical thinking, it's really more than just number crunching. It's fundamental for sound economic reasoning,
Yeah.
for making effective decisions. And as you move up in your career, showing those skills in concrete ways, that becomes super important, especially, like you said, in interviews. Exactly. And we looked at this source, Analytical Interview Questions for Economists, which gives a pretty good window into how employers are trying to gauge this. They use these behavioral questions, right?
Right, asking about past experiences.
Yeah, like this one. Describe a project or situation which best demonstrates your analytical abilities. What was your role? Sounds broad, but the sample answer they give really zeroes in on what they want.
It does. And what's interesting is how that sample answer immediately grounds it in something tangible, evaluating an infrastructure project.
Right, not just theory.
Not at all. It involved a cost-benefit analysis using, practical tools like econometric modeling.
Which is essentially using statistical methods on economic data, yeah, to test theories or make predictions. Oh.
Exactly. So in that infrastructure example, you might use it to predict, say, the link between traffic flow and economic growth. The answer specifically mentioned looking at traffic volumes, costs, potential growth. Although, interestingly, a common pitfall there is underestimating things like long-term maintenance or just how hard it is to forecast traffic way out in the future.
That's a really good point about acknowledging uncertainty.
Yeah.
A deeper analysis would have to grapple with that.
Definitely.
And I think for you listening, the big takeaway here is that emphasis on data and modeling. It's not just saying I'm analytical. You've got to show how you use tools, rigorously evaluated stuff, and got results. In that example, the result was securing funding. So it's showing your impact through the analysis.
And connecting that to the bigger picture of an economics career, well, it shows economists are often asked for these evidence-based recommendations, things with real consequences. So being able to analyze rigorously and make a compelling case based on that analysis, that's a hallmark of a successful economist.
The source also brings up the importance of structure, of a systematic approach. They have this question: tell me about a time when you need to develop and use detailed procedure to successfully complete a project.
Ah, yes. That gets right at the methodical thinking needed in economics. And the example they used, leading a study on minimum wage effects, that fits perfectly.
How so?
Well, the key thing there was creating a standardized methodology for collecting data, for analyzing it across different industries, different regions. It wasn't just ad hoc. It was designed carefully to make sure the findings were reliable, comparable.
Right, because comparing apples to apples is crucial.
Crucial. And a big debate in minimum wage studies is always the counterfactual, what would have happened without the change. Designing a method that tackles that robustly, that's where the deeper analytical thinking really shows.
And that structure, like the example shows, it allows for those reliable comparisons, which feeds into better policy decisions. So if you're someone who values thoroughness, who wants to make a difference, understanding how to create and use these procedures is, well, vital.
Which leads us pretty naturally to the next kind of question they highlight. Give me a specific example of a time when you used good judgment and logic in solving a problem.
Okay, so this moves beyond just the process to the actual thinking, the economic reasoning involved in making a call.
Precisely.
And the scenario they use is quite relevant. Analyzing policy options during a downturn, high-stakes stuff, where you absolutely need that logical reasoning, that economic modeling, to weigh the different trade-offs.
Yeah, and what really jumps out at me there is the focus on evaluating trade-offs, economic problems. They rarely have simple, clear-cut answers, do they?
No, definitely not.
It's about understanding the potential upsides and downsides of different actions, and then recommending the path that, seems best, balancing those costs and benefits.
Like the example of recommending a targeted stimulus package for infrastructure. A balanced approach.
Exactly. It shows that judgment in action.
It really drives home that economic principles aren't just academic exercises. They're tools for tackling real challenges. And being able to walk someone through your logic in a past situation, That's powerful in an interview.
Mm-hmm. Then the final question Tyke this source brings up kind of ties it all together. Tell me about a time when you had to analyze information and make a recommendation. What kind of thought process did you go through? What was your reasoning behind your decision?
Right, this is where you show the whole analytical arc from start to finish.
Yeah.
And the example they give, assessing a new tax policy, is a great illustration. It covers gathering data, looking at what other places did,
Right. Comparative analysis.
using economic models to predict impacts, and importantly, consider all these other factors like how consumers might react or the administrative costs.
And I think the iterative aspect is key there, too. The example shows the initial analysis led to suggesting modifications to the policy.
Ah, so it wasn't just a yes-no. It was about refining.
Exactly. It shows a sophisticated understanding. Analysis often leads to refinement, not just a final answer. It's about improving solutions based on evidence.
Okay, so we've seen why these skills matter, how they get assessed. But the big question for you listening is, how do you actually build these skills? How do you get better?
Right. And that's where our second source comes in, how to build analytical skills as an economic leader. It has some really practical advice from experts. Building on that data point, Dr. Kamal Pancholi offers a more detailed framework.
What does she emphasize?
Well, this source generally talks about a holistic approach. Like
Right.
one starting point is just continuous learning from other experts. Reading widely, attending webinars, just staying plugged into the latest thinking. That ongoing engagement is fundamental.
Absolutely essential. And they also stress getting your hands dirty with data, right?
Additionally, it's not passive learning. It's about actively working with real information, using the tools, spreadsheets, statistical software, whatever, to collect, analyze, visualize it.
It can feel a bit daunting, though, facing huge data sets. Where would you suggest someone starting out could find, manageable data to practice with?
That's a fair question. A lot of government agencies, international organizations like the World Bank or IMF, they publish tons of data freely. Just exploring those, even with basic tools like Excel, can be incredibly valuable for building intuition.
You did.
And Dr. Panchola specifically, she really emphasizes needing that strong foundation in economic theory,
Boy.
but combining it with data literacy, critical thinking, and knowing your econometrics. She also mentions research skills, communication, which is key thinking across disciplines, and just that commitment to continuous learning.
It's a broad skill set.
It is. And she adds mentorship and seeking feedback as vital parts of that development process, too.
That's a really comprehensive view from Dr. Pancholi. And Hardik Unadket, does he add anything different?
He echoes a lot of those points. Mastering the fundamentals, actively doing problem-solving exercises, constantly sharpening data analysis and critical thinking. He also highlights staying updated on research and, importantly, collaborating with others.
Collaboration is interesting, getting different perspectives.
Exactly. And Arishi Gupta brings in this idea of constantly expanding your toolbox,
Yeah.
meaning always adding new insights, new techniques, new ways of looking at economic problems. And he strongly echoes the need for hands-on experience with real data. Practice, practice, practice.
She keeps coming back to actually doing it.
It does. And then Deepali Pandey adds her angle, too. She stresses understanding core statistical concepts, being good at reading charts and graphs, visual literacy.
Which is so important for communication.
Absolutely. And using data analysis tools effectively, whether it's Excel, Python, R, whatever. Plus, cultivating critical thinking about economic issues, breaking down complexity, applying theory logically, and again, that lifelong learning commitment.
Sometimes it feels like academic theory can be a bit detached from the day-to-day of an economics job. How do you make sure you're applying theory in a way that's actually practical?
That's a really important bridge to build. I think the key is to actively look for the links. When you see an economic issue, maybe in the news or at work, consciously try to analyze it using the theories you know. Practice applying models to data, predicting outcomes. That active application is what closes the gap between theory and practice.
Makes sense.
And what's really striking when you look at all these expert views together is that consistent theme. It's the synergy, right? Theoretical knowledge, practical data skills, critical thinking, problem solving, they all have to work together.
It's not enough just to know the models.
Not at all. You need to apply them skillfully to real situations using data and, well, good judgment.
And that connects perfectly back to those interview questions we talked about earlier. They weren't asking for textbook definitions. They wanted concrete examples of applying skills to get results. So for you listening, the advice seems really actionable. It's about committing to learn continuously, yes, but also actively practicing with data, pushing yourself with new problems, talking and working with others, and crucially, taking time to reflect on how you're doing and getting feedback.
Yeah, and framing it that way maybe makes it feel less overwhelming. You can break it down into those pieces. Learn, practice, challenge, collaborate, reflect. It becomes a more manageable journey of development.
Right, not one giant mountain to climb, but steps you can take.
Precisely. Consistent effort across those key areas.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've really unpacked why strong analytical skills are just non-negotiable for a career in economics.
Yeah, absolutely essential.
We've looked at how employers try to assess these skills, often through those behavioral questions, asking for specific past examples.
Asking you to tell the story of your analysis.
Yeah. And we've heard some really valuable, practical advice from experts on how you can actively build and sharpen these abilities throughout your career.
And if we think back to the start, this being part of our career conversations series, well, developing these analytical skills isn't just about landing the job. It's really about building the foundation for a meaningful, impactful career where you can actually help understand and maybe even solve complex economic problems.
That's a great way to put it. So considering everything we've talked through today, the interview examples, the expert advice, here's a final thought for you to ponder. Reflecting on your own path, your own interests in economics, what's the one specific area of your analytical toolkit? Maybe it's data analysis tools, maybe it's critical thinking, maybe refining your grasp of theory that you feel most motivated to develop further right now.
A good question for self-reflection.
Definitely. Maybe take some time with that, perhaps revisit some of the ideas we touched on. It really is about that ongoing journey of learning, growing, and hopefully making an impact.